Okay, let's talk a little bit about the tools, shall we? Because this was one of the major items of discussion. And in fact, if you have watched the video just posted today, the very first thing that Zahi Hawass says is, oh, I know how the pyramids were built. And the Joe Rogan says, do you? And he says, yeah, I know what they did. And he says, I can show you. Come to Egypt, he says. There is this technique where a skilled workman will go on top of one of these blocks that are usually stones. Then he will draw with a pencil exact line of the middle in the weak spots of the block. And then Zahi Hawass said he will use an iron nail and a specialized hammer. And then he will hit it and the stone will cut in two. Now, I have seen this. I have seen this happen. I found videos for it. And it's true. That's something that skilled people can do, skilled workmen and stonemasons can do. To me, though, it was important to say that the nail was iron, because it doesn't matter if we date the pyramids to 5,000 years ago, to 10,000 years ago, or to 30,000 years ago. In either of these cases, was there iron? No, no iron. So iron should be out the question. If you're talking about how the pyramids were built, don't mention iron because it's pointless. What would they have had even if we dated 5,000 years ago? Because if we go to the dating of 10,000, 30,000, particularly 30,000, we are in the Paleolithic, so the only thing they would have had is not even metal. Because remember, you have Bronze Age, Iron Age. Before the Bronze Age, you have the Chalcolithic, which is the Copper Age, right? Copper was discovered before bronze, which was discovered before iron. Technically, well, actually, okay, let me be technical so I don't miseducate. Iron was known even before the Iron Age, because iron initially was harvested from meteorite, which I think is phenomenal. It's fantastic. You know, when you read Conan, whether it be the game Conan Exile or in general, you have star metal. Iron for the ancients was exactly a metal coming from the sky, the cosmos indeed, because these were situations which they found it first before they could even take it from actual ore. But the ability to melt it and work it, those type of furnaces that could reach those temperatures, only occurred in the Iron Age. But they knew about iron and they had found it already. It's just that they couldn't work with it the same way they do once we reach the technology, they meaning mankind. But yeah, Chalcolithic is the Copper Age. So yeah, if the pyramids go back 30,000 years ago, they only have access to stone. Flint and whatnot. If it happened 5,000 years ago, as we think, then yeah, they would have had copper tools. But can you use a copper nail to achieve the same thing is what I would want to discuss, is what I would have asked him if I was the interviewer. Because yeah, you're mentioning that, and then later on, I kind of doubt it because copper is quite soft. I think it's going to bend, but that's just me. I haven't tested it. I'm just speculating. I don't know what you guys think. If any of you is a smith or someone who's used to working metals, that do let me know if that's what you think as well. And then later on, he speaks about tools that were of stone, but this stone, he says, and I think this was a language barrier, the stone in question was very sharp. This is why it could have been used to cut the stone that is used to build as a building material or a resource. Did he mean sharp though? Because sharp, so if a stone is sharp, it can break, right? So maybe he meant hard. Because if you think about it, that's what we did for the entirety of prehistory. When you have flint knappers, the act of knapping is take a harder stone and use it to crack flakes out of softer stone that then can be turned into a tool. For instance, flint. It's a fantastic stone to do that. With the way it shakes, it breaks into predictable flakes if you're skilled. And of course, if that's what you've been doing for generations, you are skilled. And I don't know if that's what he meant. The mainstream view is that during the Stone Age, men were mostly hunter-gatherers, and scavenging would have been considered the main pattern of subsistence behavior. And that would have been the case both in the Middle and Upper Paleolithic in Europe, but also more appropriately for this discussion in the late African Stone Age, suggesting also a very early start of hunting. Quarrying and manufacturing of stone, including flint, would have been a multi-generational endeavor, typical of organized ancient human settlements, and in fact at the very core of tribal societal organization. Now, whether they could produce stone tools so efficient to be able to build a pyramid made of over 1 million blocks is really the, shall we say, $1 million question here. So Maramane says they can use copper to cut stone. I think that the current accepted method is that they use wires and a hard sand-like material like we use diamonds today. So that's an interesting theory. I wish that they would replicate it because I want to see it. How long would it take? How much? Because the time component as well has to be considered. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Okay, so slight topics. I kind of want to share this because this is interesting. The orange. I work with copper almost every day. I believe it's impossible. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So we'll have to see if this wire technique works, because again, as we see, I do think that if you're trying to use a nail, it's going to bend. But then again, that's something that would have to be tested before. Because I know sometimes we think something is impossible and then maybe it's not, depending on the technique used. But I agree. I don't think that you could use copper tools that way. The wire idea, that could be interesting to see. Yeah, copper is quite soft. Absolutely. Copper is soft. Totally. Even iron is soft, to be honest with you. But then again, if it's wrought iron, because oftentimes in history, even when the Romans used the term ferrum, sometimes they use a separate term for steel, but other times they do say ferrum, but it might still be technically classified as a mild steel or low carbon, depending. So it's even the nomenclature can get a little confusing when it comes to what is steel, what is iron, because the Romans absolutely had access to steel, and sometimes some blades, even in the Etruscan sense, are steel. They are steel. So when we say that they're using an iron nail, it is also possible that it was some kind of low carbon steel. That's also possible. We'll have to review, but steel has been around for a very long time. It is not a modern thing. And once I almost had I had a very animated disagreement with a cousin of mine, because he kept insisting, no, the Romans couldn't have possibly access to steel. And that's unfortunately a little ignorance on his part, because the Romans absolutely had access to steel. Medieval people obviously were using it and testing all sorts of different types of steel, and they knew how to normalize the steel. They knew how to apply heat treatment. Sometimes they even made mistakes and made we have sets of armor that are high carbon steel. A high carbon steel is great for swords. It's not great for armors. Medium carbon steel usually is best, but we know that they were testing. They were constantly experimenting, and sometimes even if you don't have access to the actual molecules, don't underestimate experiential knowledge. You may not understand what's going on in there exactly from a scientific standpoint, but you can still, with a lot of experience, understand what works and what doesn't. And so there is that. But the Romans and the Etruscans, even before the Romans, 100% had access to steel. It's just that the modern type of steel that we use, whether it be steel with the addition of chromium, or whether it be, modern steel, which is a lot more homogeneous, of course, if you compare it to medieval steel already, and ancient steel, it's a different variety. But what's modern is the mass production of steel in the industrial sector. That's modern. And I think people confuse that, the mass industrialization of steel for like railway and all other applications. That's what people confuse with ancient steel, which still was a thing. Maybe archaeologists in 2,000 years will give us they'll call us something like that. Who knows? I mean, usually we say the information age at one point, when they have the burst of the internet, rise of computer and technology, how it changes and we interact with it and all that. I guess that's a good name for it, but who knows? I mean, think about it for a second. And this is something it blew my mind when I thought about it the first time many years ago. But people in the medieval period didn't consider themselves to be medieval, and they did not consider that time to be the Middle Ages, because they weren't in the middle of anything. They were in the present. So from the point of view of medieval people, yeah, they could have considered the Romans, like, yeah, that's the Roman age. For them, there is a disconnection between the Romans and themselves. The Romans are the past. In fact, to a medieval person, first century Rome is a similar distance than there is between us and a person in the Middle Ages. It's 1,000 years of difference. That's kind of crazy as well if you think about it. Yet, we call it Middle Ages because they're in the middle between classical antiquity and our time today. But it's only perspective, which means in 2,000 years from now, we might be medieval to the future generations that will be studying. And maybe they will change it. At that point, we are medieval people. We could be. So to a medieval person, they're from the present. And that's something that is obvious, but you've got to kind of sit down for a moment and think about it. It's one of those things. Another similar situation like this that I always find fascinating is the fact that even if we were not to accept the alternative dating of the Giza Plateau and the pyramids at 10,000, 30,000, whatever the heck, 1,000 years ago, even if we just stick to 4,500 years ago, so the current accepted dating, still Cleopatra, as I mentioned before, would be closer to the invention of the iPhone that she was to the building of the first pyramid, even in that situation, which means that the ancient Egypt was already ancient in ancient Egypt. The misinformation age, 100%. Do you think it was obsidian? No, Benjamin, I wouldn't think so, because obsidian is a fascinating stone. I have a video dedicated on everything, guys. 1,200 video, 12 years on the platform. I have a video on obsidian, how it was used, for example, by the Aztecs, so the Mexica, as they refer to themselves. And it's great for arrow points. It's great for the kind of swords, if you want to call them. It's kind of a glorified club with stone cutting implements added to it, but whatever. It's good for cutting, and it can go down to the micro. With obsidian, you can get so sharp, is insane. Like even sharper than a modern razor. You can get that level of sharpness, but the problem with stone, similarly to the problem with wood, is that these are materials that are not very durable. So if you cut multiple times, every time the friction, the impact will chip, and eventually it will be unusable, and you'll have to repair it, substitute sections. So I don't know if if they use obsidian because of how sharp it is. It's good at cutting through human tissue or animal muscle tissue, but it's not great for smacking it against a rock because it's gonna get broken. That's the way I see it with the studies I've done on obsidian. I love obsidian mostly because it looks great and you see it in video games, so I kind of got interested in it, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure it would be great for this specific application. As I say, it's good for arrowheads. Method on my sources says obsidian can get down to 10 molecules thick. Yeah, exactly, Sondre. I didn't remember the exact thickness, but I do know that it's insane. I do know it's insane. How crazy, like, thin obsidian can get is insane. Really is. Would you accept an invitation from Joe Rogan to show up on his podcast, asks me Samuel27. Well, of course. I just don't think I'm relevant enough. I think there are other people that should be invited before me. But if it ever did happen and he wanted to talk about, I mean, what would he talk about with me? Maybe the idea of searching the truth, or the idea of how to try to be as unbiased as possible. There are a lot of topics that we could discuss, I guess. I just don't think I could offer as much as other guests that have been invited, and likewise, I personally don't think that I'm that famous. Yeah, I've got a channel, a following, but anyways, anyone who invites me, I'd go. Anyone. I don't have a problem with that. Totally.